G'day guys, it's Josh here from CyclonesOZ, and I've got an update on the El Niño event that's coming in 2026. It's likely to be the strongest El Niño event on record, and it could have some pretty significant consequences, rainfall and severe weather-wise, across Australia, particularly through inland regions. I'm going to be going through the latest data. We've had some recent significant developments, particularly in the last couple of weeks, plus confirmation that the declaration is just around the corner. In fact, it could happen on Thursday, just 2 days away from when I'm recording this forecast update. But first, if you are brand new to my channel, please do consider subscribing. We're so close to 100,000 here on YouTube, and I can't do it without you, so please do consider clicking the subscribe button, and a massive thank you to over 15,000 likes and shares on the channel in the past week or so. Now, first things first, we need to establish what an El Niño event is, and it's pretty simple in essence. It's basically a positive anomaly of sea surface temperatures out here in the equatorial Pacific Ocean, in the Niño 3.4 index, which is about 2/3 of the way between Australia and South America. It's further away from Australia than it is from South America, and it's to do with the oscillation and change or increase in the case of an El Niño in sea temperatures out in this region of the equatorial Pacific Ocean. This might sound pretty insignificant, particularly with how far it is away from Australia, but it causes a breakdown in the Walker circulation, which is what keeps warm water flowing across towards Australia and keeping our rainfall drivers, or that warm water offshore from Australia, continuing to flow. When we don't have El Niño, we very much struggle to see rainfall across portions of Australia. I've put together a simple kind of PowerPoint presentation here on what this El Niño is going to be. As you can see, we've got that El Niño watch declared at this point in time. The strongest El Niño event in recorded history could be just around the corner here. It's not going to just impact Australia, but Australia could be adversely impacted. So let's have a look at what's going on here. Now, of course, El Niño and La Niña, they sound like polar opposites. Obviously, in Australia's case, La Niña is the rainfall driver, El Niño is the drought and bushfire driver, but it's not as simple and as clear-cut as that. There's a few key differences. First things first, La Niña typically impacts during spring and summer and has its greatest implications on the Queensland and Northern Territory, as well as parts of New South Wales' rainfall patterns, as it is impacting during the summer. So typically La Niña is our wet season driver, and El Niño is the opposite of that. It's our dry season driver, which means it impacts southeastern Australia, so Victoria, portions of southern New South Wales, South Australia, Tasmania, and portions of Western Australia during our autumn and winter months. So they are polar opposites, I guess, in a way, but they don't impact the same locations, and they very rarely impact the same places in terms of the predictable and similar impacts year in, year out. La Niña typically occurs once every 2 to 3 years, whereas El Niño is sort of once every 3 to 5 years. El Niño is obviously quite a bit rarer. The last significant El Niño event that had massive consequences around Australia was back in 2019, which led into the Black Summer bushfires. We also had a pretty strong El Niño event back in 2023, but that was mitigated by warm sea temperatures around Australia, and that's likely to be the case this year as well. And as you can see, La Niña, strong Walker circulation, El Niño, weakened Walker circulation. In fact, sometimes it completely breaks down, and that, of course, allows that warmer water to slide back out into the eastern Pacific Ocean here, and cooler water to begin to build around Australia. But I want to stress that this is the typical phase of an El Niño. This is not what we've got this year. This is just typical El Niño conditions. In fact, what we've got this year and what we're expecting to see is such a wide expanse of much above average sea temperatures that they're actually going to push right up against Australia and kind of act like a La Niña would in terms of having warmer water adjacent to the Australian coastline, as well as having much warmer than average water out here into the equatorial Pacific Ocean. Now, that, of course, is going to generate one of the strongest El Niño events on record, with the anomaly expected to be as much as 3.5 degrees Celsius above average. That's huge, and nearly 150% stronger than what the previous record would be at about 2.5 degrees Celsius above average. You can actually see some models are a bit more aggressive than that. There's a few ensembles now that have been released by the National Oceanographic Association over in the United States, suggesting that the anomaly could rise to as much as 4.2 degrees above average. That would be, I mean, beyond historic. It'd be kind of incomprehensible in terms of the ramifications that that could have through the Pacific Ocean, but I don't believe it's going to get that strong. Anyway, I digress. Warmer water around Australia will mitigate those El Niño related impacts for Australia. Of course, we're expecting that declaration to happen very soon, and we're expecting super El Niño thresholds, or that plus 2 degrees Celsius anomaly, to occur sometime in July. We're already in El Niño conditions right now. The current anomaly is +1. We're just waiting for that to be sustained for a period of 2 weeks, which should happen this Thursday, so just in about 2 days from now. And yeah, as you can see, the anomaly strength when compared to previous record-holding years, such as the 1997-98 El Niño, anyone thinking back that far around Australia, very dry period going into the millennium drought, or the millennial drought, very significant amount of dry weather. And that is the previous strongest El Niño event on record. We are expecting to get at least half a degree Celsius warmer than what we saw back in 1997/1998. And that could, again, spell some pretty dramatic ramifications for areas expecting adverse El Niño related impacts. Like I said, 2023-24 was pretty strong as well. 2015 into 2016 was very strong. That was a super El Niño, 2.6 degrees above average. That contributed in the drought that led up to the Black Summer bushfires in 2019, early 2020 across southeastern Australia. However, a weaker El Niño in 2019 was kind of the final nail in the coffin, if you'd like. We are expecting to get very, very warm in the Pacific Ocean this year. Now, just before I get into some of the forecast details in terms of rainfall and impacts around Australia, I just want to leave you with this here. El Niño is a very complex and nuanced climate driver. The entire ENSO circulation is, but it's only one of 6 major climate drivers around Australia, which means it's not the be-all and end-all. So when you're seeing El Niño-related news and information like what I've been presenting on my pages in the last couple of weeks, it's very important to read through it calmly and collectively and to prepare instead of panicking. There's no point in panicking about El Niño. Not only can we not control it, but it also isn't expected to be that much of a significant player in the Australian weather patterns for reasons I'll get to in just a few seconds. Coastal areas should remain above average in terms of rainfall. Inland areas are likely going to fare the worst, particularly through inland Victoria, Western New South Wales, South Australia and WA, which is not good news because they are our key growing regions. Whilst it's going to be a record-breaking El Niño in terms of intensity, it's not likely to be record-breaking in strength, and that highlights it very nicely that El Niño's strength is not directly correlated to its impacts in Australia. And of course, like I said, it is just one driver. Another very important thing is, and this is something that's been causing quite a lot of confusion lately because it is continuing to rain around Australia, obviously, but rain is going to continue to fall, obviously. I know that that sounds like a pretty silly point, but it's understandable. People think that El Niño completely turns off that tap and cuts off the water supply to Australia. That's just not the case. El Niño will still allow rainfall to fall across Australia, but it is likely to be less, particularly in those inland locations. Let's jump into some of that forecasting data right now and talk about what we're looking at going into 2026. Just going to rip the band-aid off here and have a look at our rainfall map. It is a very, very red picture here. Now, I know red can be concerning, but there is some key points to understand. That is some good news. Green indicates above average rainfall accumulations, and you can see these above average rainfall accumulations extending right down the Queensland and New South Wales coastline through our winter months. We've also got a corridor of slightly above average rainfall here through portions of WA, and you can see the anomaly isn't as intense through portions of Queensland and New South Wales as what it is in, say, southwestern WA. Southwestern WA is likely to fare the absolute worst from this El Niño event as per the current latest forecast modelling, and as well as that, portions of central and northern Victoria. These are going to be the 2 hardest hit regions of Australia that have serious rainfall deficiencies through winter 2026 from this El Niño event. And the reason is that these locations are a bit further away from moderating sea surface temperatures around Australia. Of course, we've got that East Australian current here coming down Australia's east coast. It's running a lot warmer than average at this time of the year. In fact, in a few spots, it's about 3.5 degrees Celsius above average. And that's allowing a lot of evaporation adjacent to the New South Wales and Queensland coastlines. And that's generating rainfall in these areas here, has been for the last couple of weeks, and will continue to produce rainfall in these areas over the next couple of months. Of course, rural Victoria and South Australia a long way away from the East Australian current, so moderating impacts there. Over in Western Australia, a bit of a different story. We do have a warmer than average Lewin current at this point in time, but we're likely to enter into a modal phase here across southern Australia, favouring positive southern annular modes, which means our entire area across southern Australia, apart from far southeastern New South Wales, which is more directly impacted by the East Australian current, is going to be favouring positive southern annular modes, which keeps frontal systems further down towards the south and is likely to translate to less rainfall for Western Australia and kind of be the last nail in the coffin here for Victoria and southern New South Wales on the rainfall side of things. But you can see there is going to be some wetter spots. And one thing that I have been saying over the last couple of weeks is, whilst most of Australia during this El Niño event is going to be a lot drier than average, most of Australians, which live in our major cities such as Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, which will be moderated by those warmer sea temperatures, will actually see more rainfall. So most of Australia will be dry, most of Australians will be wet, if that does make sense. Now, let's have a look at our indice right now. This is the Niño 3.4 index, and we've seen some massive warming recently. This is just a 10-week graphic here, and you can see we've gone from, very weak La Niña conditions 10 weeks ago, shooting up past neutral and then into El Niño conditions in the space of about 4 weeks, and now we're well on the way to a prolific El Niño event now, just 10 weeks after being exiting La Niña. You can see that anomaly is plus 1.289 degrees right now, much above that El Niño thresholds, and is continuing to rise very, very rapidly at a rate of about 0.005 of a degree per day, closing in on about 0.4 degrees per week. And we're expecting this trend to continue right into about July, when warming is expected to continue, but should be a little bit on the slower side. And you can see that El Niño here on our SSTA anomaly graphic here, really beginning to trickle out into the Pacific Ocean. And like I said at the start of this update here, a typical El Niño highlighted in the red would typically mean above average sea temperatures protruding out to about Hawaii and then down the South American coastline, whereas in this year we've got those El Niño conditions in blue extending right out through the Western Pacific and then down into the Australian region as well. And whilst we do have a little bit of cooler water around Queensland, that's not where El Niño impacts. As you can recall, it's southeastern Australia where that warmer water is still very much present, and thanks to coastal flows, we are expecting that to be kind of the driver behind the rainfall coming into southeastern Australia. So definitely a lot going on here. This El Niño event going into 2026 is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before around Australia. This is a highly unusual setup that we've got. But again, even though it is highly unusual and different to anything that we've seen before, it isn't likely to be the, worst drought period on record here. We're not looking at the absolute driest winter period on record. Sure, there's going to be a lot of places and a lot of farmers, particularly inland, that are going to do it really tough, and that is quite a concern going into their key growing times and key growing seasons through these regions. But at this point in time, it's not likely to be the absolute worst on record. We're not seeing any indication from modelling around Australia that we're going to see the absolute driest and warmest winter on record. That's just not going to happen. But there will certainly be places that do see much below average rainfall, and it is unfortunately going to be those inland areas where our agricultural communities do depend on rainfall. Of course, any questions or comments, shoot them my way in the comment section down below. I'd be more than happy to help you out as well in emails or on messages. So, of course, any questions, please do share them with me. It's a difficult concept to wrap your head around, particularly if you don't have a great understanding of the climate, which, let's face it, that's a lot of people, myself included, to be honest. There is just so much going on around Australia right now on the weather front. So if you do have any questions or you've got any feedback or concerns, please do shoot them my way. Especially if you're a farmer inland, you actually want a localized rainfall projection or a brief rainfall projection over in winter for your location. Just shoot me an email and I'll help you out. No fees, no strings attached. I'll give you a helping hand in those areas. But that'll be it for me today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I thought that this was something that we want to be talking about just ahead of what could be the El Niño declaration on Thursday. But that's going to be it for me today. Have a wonderful remainder of your Tuesday, and I'll catch you on the next storm. Goodbye.